Welcome back. Now things are looking pretty great. We have the weapon, we can attack, but we want to hit things. And in order to hit things, we're going to want to have some sort of collision volume on our weapon. And I think that a box is the perfect shape for a collision volume. So if we go into BP weapon and take a look at our actual mesh for the weapon. Now, keeping in mind, we may swap this out for other different types of weapons, but in general, our blade is shaped kind of like a box. And we can add a box component to it and sort of shape it around that blade and use that for overlap events when we swing the sword. So we'd like to add a box component to our sword. So let's do this. We're going to hop back into Visual Studio and go into weapon.h. And here in weapon.h, we'd like a box component. Now the type for a box component is going to be uBoxComponent. And it works just like a sphere component, only it's shaped like a box. So we're going to forward declare uBoxComponent. And that way we can create a variable of this type. And I'm going to make it private. So this will be a uBoxComponent pointer called weaponBox. And I'd like to be able to edit this within the details panel so we can change its size and position. Now, if we go to item.h where we created our sphere, we made it visible anywhere. I'm going to use that same uProperty specifier on our weaponBox. So I'll make it visible anywhere and I'll stick it in the category weapon properties. That way we can find it easily in the details panel. But just creating this variable is not enough. It's basically uninitialized, so we need to create it in weapon.cpp. And for that, we're going to go up to the constructor, which doesn't exist. We didn't create a constructor in the weapon, so we're going to need to create one. So up in the public section, that's where our constructor needs to go. We'll make our aWeapon constructor. So aWeapon, and we'll implement this in weapon.cpp. And we'll stick this right at the top above all other functions. And we'll say aWeapon, fully qualifying the function. And here in aWeapon, we can construct our new box component, which means we need to include the header file for that type. And just like sphere component, box component is in components. So we can do an include here, and it's going to be components/box component.h. And now we can construct a new box component, and our variable was called weaponBox. So let's make this weaponBox. We're going to say weaponBox equals create default subobject, specifying the type uBoxComponent, and we'll give it some identifier text. We'll call it weaponBox. And I'd like the box component to move along with the mesh. In other words, I want it to be attached to the root component. So we'll take weaponBox and call setupAttachment. And we'll pass in the root component, which we can get with get root component. So it's as simple as that. Now the weaponBox needs to be positioned on the actual blueprint, which is where we select the weapon mesh. So we're going to go ahead and save everything here and hop back into the editor and do a quick hot reload. And after a hot reload, I'll go back into BP weapon and there's my box. And it doesn't really look like the right shape, but that's okay. We're going to change that. We're going to take our weaponBox, select it, and I don't want to scale it. You see, components, when you scale them, they scale every other scene component that's attached to them. Now, there are no scene components attached to the box, and I don't plan on attaching anything to the box in the future, but it's good practice not to scale these collision shapes, but instead change their properties, which are designed to be able to change their shape without actually changing their scale. So if something was attached to the box, it would not scale as I'm changing the box's shape. And to do that, we change the box extent, which has an X, Y, and Z. Much like the sphere has a sphere radius. If we change the sphere radius, we can leave the scale for the sphere at 1. So that's a very nice handy trick, and we're going to use that for our collision shapes. So if I take my box extent, the X, and scale it in, we see that we're scaling it along the X axis for the box. And likewise, we can change the Y, and that scales it along the Y. So I want this box to roughly be around the shape of the blade. So I'm going to scale it in a little bit in both X and Y. And I'm going to position it up a little bit so that it encompasses that blade. And I'm going to turn off snapping so I can make it roughly in the center of the blade. And as I scale it up in the Z direction, I now have a box around the blade. And this is great because we can use this box for overlap events. And that's exactly what we're going to do. In fact, we can test this out by going into the event graph with our weapon box selected and using onComponentBeginOverlap. And since a box component is derived from primitive component, it has this event. And we can check to see if we hit something. We can simply draw a debug sphere if we do. So we can say draw debug sphere. Get that debug sphere, set its duration to 10 seconds, and we can draw it on overlap by taking the other actor, which we hit, and getting actor location. So get actor location gives us that location, which we can pass in for the center of our debug sphere. And now if we get any overlap events, we'll see that debug sphere where we hit something. And already we're getting that sphere because the character itself overlapped with that box. And if I equip the sword, then we now see that we're getting lots of overlap events from our actual character. That's okay. There are ways to check to make sure that we don't overlap with the actual owner of the weapon. We'll get to all that, but this is just a proof of concept showing us that our collision box works and we can program it to hit things. So that's going to wrap up this video. We now have a collision box on our weapon. We do need to optimize it and make sure that it only overlaps with things we want it to overlap with. And then we can figure out exactly how we'll make things happen when we swing the sword and hit stuff. So great job. I'll see you in the next video.